people wonder what the heck happened to you.
Yeah.
Um, and so this is Focamelia. I was born this way. I was actually born without fingers, elbows or thumbs. The fingers I have here were they're surgically manufactured aftermarket specials. I was born with like an oven mitt that had the rudimentary bone and nerve structure for three fingers, and so I did a bunch of operations when I was younger. I don't know how many, well over a dozen, where they split my oven mitts apart to separate the fingers. Then they took one of them off and moved it up to give me an opposable thumb, which is an incredible feature. I got one and a half of those, and so I'm 100% functional, but I look a lot different.
Right.
I'm technically disabled because the public regards me as disabled, and that means I'm disabled under the Americans with Disabilities Act, because that's one of the categories of disability. If you're regarded as disabled, well, you qualify. Not
Right.
not that that does a darn thing for you, but in any event, that's what people call me. So here I am. But it's a fascinating journey, and people look at me and they think that my existence is a perpetual parade of insurmountable physical obstacles, and it's not.
Right. Right.
I'm 100% functional, but it's the mind where you fight this battle.
Kurz looking clean with his whole sales team. We ain't come to talk nonsense. It's all about the process and profits until we make $1 billion from deposits. He never slacked and teach him to take action. So far from whacking, never gave up his passion. Can't catch him lacking, dapper down on his fashion. He forever stacking, running up all real estate mastermind. Check out his book, he gave us the blueprint. Really can't hate the grind. Put in the work, no making excuses. Quitting's a waste of time. You made it this far, don't make your life useless. Pull up and taste the wine. He got the flavor, mixing the juices.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Freedom Achiever podcast. My name is David Adam Kurz, the founder and head coach over at the Freedom Organization, a coaching and consulting company for real estate professionals. Now, my job is to consistently bring freedom achievers to the Freedom Achiever podcast, hence the name. And what we do is we like to bring guests on that are going to positively impact your life or business in a great positive way. Now, the company's mission to impact the lives and businesses of people in a positive manner and do it for over 1 million people. That's our mission. That's what we are here to do. That's why we do group training. That's why we do classes. That's why we give an academy completely free to all real estate professionals nationwide. And that's why we do this podcast. And today I have the great honor of bringing on a good friend of mine, Kip Roth. Kip, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well, David. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you for doing this with me, by the way.
Hey, you didn't tell me this is going to go to 1 million people, man. I mean, come on. You should
listen. This is our mission, man. This is our mission. Look, if you know better than anybody, if we can't impact the lives of people, then we shouldn't even be doing anything.
Correct.
You know, this is what we're supposed to do. This is what we're designed to do. And people like you and I, who a lot of people don't know. Let me break this down a little bit. So Kip Roth, former Tom Ferry coach, now a coach at a KW in Charlotte, North Carolina, servicing 350 agents in-house, doing a great job with it. Does a great job of stepping on stages. I had Kip on my stage once. Has a disability that we're gonna dig into, right? There's the arms, so we got to talk about the arms, right? But it's funny because I love talking to you because you have no shame about talking about this, because for you it's not a disability, and that's the way I see it with you. And so many people are like right now with the new news and the NAR, and people feel disabled right now. They don't even know what disability is, Yeah. And so they feel like defeated, and they feel like my business is going to be taken away and I can't charge 6% anymore. And like, this is what's happening now in this world. Right. And so, Kip, tell us a little bit about yourself. I would never do it enough justice. You're a fantastic human being. And so tell us a little bit about yourself and what you've been doing and how you've positioned to be who you are today.
Sure. Hey, thank you for that wonderful introduction, David. I appreciate that. And I'm standing here looking at your beard versus my gray beard, and really, life is not fair, dude. You look fantastic. I'm telling you.
Listen, this is hair dye, man. All right. Listen, people ask me all the time. They're like, "Do you dye your beard?" I go, "Of course." Like, I'm almost 50 years old, guys. Like, you know what I mean? Like, yes, I dye my hair, I dye my beard, because if I didn't, with as big as my beard is, children would sit on my lap and ask me for presents. All
Yeah.
right. Like, I have the rosy cheeks. I can't have the white beard too,
I haven't gotten the kids sitting on my lap yet, but, just, I guess that's coming. Yeah, so my background, I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I graduated school and went to law school, and I practiced law for about 15 years, couldn't stand it for another second, and then I bought a home investors franchise in Utah. I moved my family from Tampa to Utah in 2005 and did home investors, the We Buy Ugly Houses people for 10, 12, 15 years, something like that. Now I'm in Charlotte. I worked for Tom Ferry for 6 plus years, something like that. Had a blast, learned a ton. They're great, 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 great people. And here I am now doing my own thing. And I you mentioned, that I look different, and it's necessary to address that because people wonder what the heck happened to you.
Yeah.
Um, and so this is folk Amelia. I was born this way. I was actually born without fingers, elbows or thumbs. The fingers I have here were they're surgically manufactured aftermarket specials. I was born with like an oven mitt that had the rudimentary bone and nerve structure for 3 fingers, and so I did a bunch of operations when I was younger. I don't know how many, well over a dozen, where they split my oven mitts apart to separate the fingers. Then they took one of them off and moved it up to give me an opposable thumb, which is an incredible feature. I got one and a half of those, and so I'm 100% functional, but I look a lot different.
Right.
I'm technically disabled because the public regards me as disabled, and that means I'm disabled under the Americans with Disabilities Act, because that's one of the categories of disability. If you're regarded as disabled, well, you qualify. Not
Right.
not that that does a darn thing for you, but in any event, that's what people call me. So here I am. But it's a fascinating journey, and people look at me and they think that my existence is a perpetual parade of insurmountable physical obstacles, and it's not.
Right. Right.
I'm 100% functional, but it's the mind where you fight this battle. And that's what, when I had the pleasure of meeting you years ago in Miami, that's what you and I spoke about. And it's great to see you again. But I'd like to help people understand that you get what you expect in this life.
Yes.
Neurologically, physiologically, you get what you expect in this life. And so on my path, I didn't always expect the best. I didn't always receive the best. But I've learned over time that the key to a powerful mindset is what you focus on, because what you focus on expands. And today, with NAR and all the nonsense with the lawsuit and the settlement now, a whole bunch of people in this industry are walking around with some pretty shaky mindsets, and that's going to get them
Yeah.
shaky results as predictably as the sun coming up in the east. So whatever questions you have about me, about my journey and how I came
Well,
across that
I do. Yeah, I want to dig into that. So you're an attorney for 15 years or 17 years. Which one did you say?
like 15, something like that.
15 years. What was it about being an attorney that you were like, yeah, this is not it. I'm gonna go buy a franchise? Because like obviously we all know attorneys go to a lot of school, they take some really big tests, and then they have amazing opportunities that are like, through the roof, that only attorneys can have. And why was that not your path?
It's a personality issue. I mean, you've taken personality profiles, right? I'm a high D, and being chained to a desk 12 hours a day, and fighting with other people all day long wasn't my thing. I mean, I did federal court class action litigation, and it's a brutally stressful environment. I was working ridiculous hours while my kids are growing up without me, and I got to 40 years old and I said, I'm done. The real trigger was my father was dying of cancer in a hospital in Bradenton, about an hour south of where I lived. And so I'm driving down, I guess it was I-75, whatever the road is between Tampa and
Yeah.
Bradenton, and
Yeah.
I keep seeing this billboard, "We Buy Ugly Houses." So I'm driving along one day. I just called them and I said, "Tell me what you guys do." And the next thing you know, I'm stroking a check for a franchise on the other side of the country, in a state that I'd never been to, in an industry I'd never worked in, to do a job I'd never done. And
Wow.
packed up the
Yeah.
family and off.
when
What's that?
somebody makes a decision like that, that kind of sort of drastic decision, like at that point, you know, you're truly done with what it is that you're doing. Like there's no going back, you know? And like, so for me, I'm like, shoot, if I'm an attorney and I'm a class action civil lawsuit guy and I'm tired and I'm stressed, why don't I just go become an ambulance chaser, right? And then put up billboards that say, call me when you're in an accident, right? And you know, would that job be easier? I don't know. I'm just assuming there are easier positions for attorneys, but for you, it was kind of like, yeah, no, I'm done. Like, I love this concept that this other company's doing. I'm going all in on that. And you're going to Utah. Like, listen, there's a big difference between Tampa, Bradenton, and Utah, right? You know, tell me about that move. Like, how did your family transition into that?
Well, it was kind of selfish to tell you the truth. It not only was a career change, but I grew up on skis. I raced in high school. I raced in college. I was a Paralympian. I was on the U.S. Paralympic ski team. I was a two-time silver medalist at the World Disabled Ski Championships and Paralympics, and a four-time national disabled ski champion. I love skiing. You know, hundreds of days a year on skis. And so I'm 40 years old, and I'm looking at my kids, and I want them to be on skis. And fortunately, they were young enough at that time that it made sense. So I I closed everything up and moved across the country, and my wife was good with it because she knew how miserable I was practicing law, and it was an adventure. And, my wife is incredible. She'll support me in whatever I want to do. She's just an amazing human being. And so off we went and spent 10 years, 10 years in Utah. And then at the end of the 10 years in Utah, I was 50 years old, and I'd had my fill, and my kids are looking at schools back east. And so I said to, my wife, Paula, "I picked this one, you pick the next one, and here we are in Charlotte."
It's awesome. I I picked this one, you picked the next one. Why did she choose Charlotte, by the way?
Well, she's got family in Atlanta, and I've got
Oh, good.
family I have family in Florence, South Carolina, so it seemed like a logical place to land, and I was all good with it, and Charlotte turned out to be great, and I don't know if we're done. I still have a yearning to be out west every now and again, but don't tell my
Yeah.
wife because she'll probably freak out to hear me say that.
What's
But
your wife's number? We're texting her this podcast. Hold on. It's like, it's funny. I've been to Charlotte before. I absolutely love Charlotte. I think Charlotte's a great town, It's like a nice mix of, a downtown. There's a nice mix of great restaurants. There's a nice mix of being able to be a little bit in the outskirts and not have to be inundated with a ton of people. I like that about Charlotte. Charlotte's a great town to be in.
Yeah, we're happy here. It's not Atlanta. I spent 2 years to the day in Atlanta after law school, and I can't do a town that big again. I can't do Miami again. That's a little large. So Charlotte's about right.
Yep. Except for Sunday. You can't go anywhere on Sunday in Charlotte.
No, you cannot, man. No, you cannot.
I made the mistake. I was staying in the Locust area, and I made the mistake in Charlotte on a Sunday evening to like have dinner, and that didn't happen. We ended up at like a McDonald's or something.
Yeah, yeah. Well, one of the downsides of it not being Atlanta is they don't have the road network that Atlanta does. Until, when I moved here 10 years ago, these guys hadn't even completed the outer ring, the 285, 485.
Right.
And that's saying something when you got a city with 2 million people that doesn't have an outer ring.
Yeah.
That's saying something. But in any event, here we are.
Yeah. All right. So you stopped being an attorney. You moved to Utah. How was your experience running this franchise? Like, what was that like?
Oh, it was a gas. It was a blast. It was a good time. And
Yeah.
the week I got there, the company home investors dropped 5,000 letters just to welcome me to the market. And the phone started ringing, and I didn't stop for 10 years. I bought and flipped and in 2009, January 2009, I got my real estate license because the market, the equity had disappeared from the market. And to survive, I had to do a few hundred short sales. So by the time I left Utah, we'd sold, 500 homes or something like that, whether flipping or short selling or just regular retail listings. But That was a lot of, that was a good time. That was a lot of experience. You know, I bought a house with a horse in the bedroom. I bought a house with goats in the basement. I saw some stuff, man.
Wow. A horse in the bedroom and goats in the bed. The horse was like alive in the bedroom, right? Because that brings me like
He
some Godfather memories.
you know, he was, but I gotta tell you something, when you walk into the master bedroom and there's a horse standing there staring back at you, and you look at the homeowner and he says, "Well, you know, we moved out a month ago and he moved in and, you know, he just came through the door and we just left him here." And I'm like, "Holy smoke."
Wow. I'm gonna do one of those only in Utah situations. Uh, the first thing when you said horse in the bedroom, I swear to you, the first thing that came to my mind was the first Godfather movie when the
Oh, yeah.
mobster woke up with the horse head in his bed.
Oh,
Remember
yeah.
that?
Oh, yeah.
I was like, all right, it was alive. It was alive. Okay, we're good. You know. So now you transition and you're in Charlotte, you're rocking it out. And so the reason that I'm going kind of step by step by step through this is because so many of you listening to this podcast right now are feeling defeated, and maybe you've attended a couple of my classes post this NAR decision, and maybe you don't feel as defeated anymore. Maybe you feel the win of what could be and what will be. And if you're in real estate long enough, and Kip, you can attest to this, if you're in real estate long enough, change will happen. You can't stop the change. These markets will change. These things are cyclical. We are going through nothing that no one else goes through. Like the mortgage industry went through TRID in 2010. Like this is what happens. And now we just have to shift the way we do business. Not a big deal, guys. Like not a big deal. And the reason I bring this up is because you feel so defeated. And here's Kip. Kip's born with a deficiency in his arms, goes through, I don't know how many tens of surgeries just so that he can have fingers and opposable thumb, and still somehow becomes a successful attorney who then moves into a franchise and owns a successful franchise, who then turns around and becomes a successful coach for Tom Ferry, who then turns around and becomes a successful coach at a KW brokerage, and who admittedly said, "I'm not done." Like, Kip, talk to me about this, man, because, you know, we got some weak folks out here. So what can you spread to them to give them the power of positivity and the power of ability?
It's all perspective, David. And I read your book, Take Action. I read it twice, and I know you understand this. It's all perspective. And growing up looking radically different than everybody else, let me just share something with you that I'm writing a book and I'm researching it and I'm living this and I'm trying to figure out. So I'm in Dallas, for example. Well, let me just start over. I get people screaming at me. People scream at me in public when they see me the first time. Literally scream in fear. I've got people every year come up and say, "If I look like you, I'd kill myself." I was sitting out in front of a 7-Eleven drinking a soda, and some woman came up and threw her change in my cup. I've been denied countless jobs because people flat out tell me I can't hire somebody who looks like you. You know, when I was younger, it's a rough path, and I was always curious why. And everybody's gonna say, "Well, if you looked in the mirror, Kip, you know, it's obvious why." But I wanted to go a little deeper, so I researched the heck out of it. What I learned was this: there were these biologists on the Serengeti studying wildebeest migration patterns. Now, bear with me here. Stick with me here, okay? They're studying
All
these
right. we,
wildebeest.
we just went from people screaming in the street to wildebeest in the Serengeti, but I'm
Yeah,
with you.
so they're studying migration patterns. Well, all the wildebeest look the same, and there's 500 in a herd. And to study migration patterns, they obviously need to look at one and study what one or two or individual specimens are doing. Well, they're out there in the back of the pickup truck or in a blind or whatever, and they're watching this wildebeest. We're going to call her Sue. And the wife calls, they reach for their coffee, they look down, they look away, they look back up, and they can't reacquire Sue. They can't find where she went in the herd of all the other wildebeest. And so they came up with a brilliant idea. They went out and caught a half a dozen wildebeest and they painted their horns white. And they figured, well, we'll be able to see them now, right? And what they actually saw was the ones that they painted their horns white were the next half a dozen that were killed. Okay, and what they learned in that was, we were taught when we were kids that the lion takes the old, the sick, or the stupid. The predator culls the herd and cleanses the gene pool by killing the ones that are vulnerable. And that's not true. The predator kills the ones who look different. Okay. And so suddenly the fact that I'm treated so differently because I've got jacked up arms, suddenly it starts to make sense on a completely different level. And then a biologist named Robert Sapolsky replicated it with zebras. And then they did it with fish. They did it with birds. They did it with insects. They did it all across the animal kingdom. And we have the same exact visual tracking software. We focus on the oddity. Okay. And so that's why I'm stared at everywhere I go. Staring is a sign of aggression in mammals. And suddenly the way I'm treated is starting to make sense. Okay.
Right.
But it
Right.
didn't make it any easier. It got easier one day when, I couldn't get a job when I was younger. I'm 21 years old. I'm unemployed. I can't get a job. Nobody will hire me. And they'll look me right in the face and say, I can't hire somebody who looks like you. I went into a restaurant to try to get a job. They said, I can't have people, see you near their food. You can't work here. It was a really difficult time. I finally got a job as a bicycle messenger in Miami. And I got that job because it was a blind hire. I responded to an ad in the newspaper, talked to them on the phone. They said, go to this mailbox in the downtown building. Here's the code. Pull out your pager and your shirt. You're hired. So I was a bicycle messenger in downtown Miami. That was the only job I could get. And one day I had a delivery and I went into a building. And I got to tell you something. I'm 21 years old and I'm flat out suicidal. I'm drinking too much. I can't get a date to save my life. I can't get a job that I want. I'm broke. I'm living on top of a restaurant. I'm still going to school, but it was an extremely difficult time, and I was flat out suicidal. And I honestly considered very, very frequently just turning my bike handlebars and eating a bus and ending it. And then I get this delivery, and I go into this building, and I get on an elevator. And just as the elevator doors are closing, this little hand comes through the opening, and a woman gets on. And she turned sideways in the elevator instead of, her back to me. I was in the back of the elevator. She turned sideways, and mammals can tell when they're being stared at, and I can tell when I'm being stared at. And she was staring at me. And I'm digging through my bag to get my delivery and my receipt book, and I just look up at her. And usually people will look away, but she didn't. She just stood there and she smiled. And then all she did next was save my life, man. She said 7 words. She said, I bet you lead an interesting life. And it wasn't a question. It was more of a statement. And I didn't say anything back. I just kind of shrugged and went back to digging through my bag. And then the bell rang and she got off the elevator and she was gone. And I never saw her again. But I'm on this elevator and I'm mulling that in my mind. I bet you lead an interesting life. I bet you lead an interesting life. And then by the time I made my delivery and got back down to the ground, I was crying uncontrollably. Because in 20 seconds, in 15 seconds, my entire perspective on my circumstances changed completely. See, I used to define my circumstances as painful, as this sucks. This is awful. I'm disabled and everybody knows it. I can't hide it. I'm never, no matter what I do in this life, my life is going to suck. I'll never have a girlfriend. I'll never get married. I'll never have kids. I'll never have meaningful work. I mean, this is pain. This is really bad. Then I get on this elevator and the woman pretty much just gave me permission to consider it interesting as opposed to painful. And David, everything changed in 20 seconds because I'm sitting out front of this building crying uncontrollably next to my bike. And I stand up and I realize that I defined my circumstances. Viktor Frankl went through the same thing in the concentration camp, right? Shakespeare talks about it. He says, there is no good or bad, but thinking makes it so. It's in the Bible. It's in the Quran. Aristotle, Socrates, Plato, they all say the same thing, that we determine what our circumstances mean. We can't change what happens to us in our lives, but we absolutely determine what it means to us. And so I changed my entire focus from pain to, gosh, this is interesting. And suddenly, I mean, interesting is an emotionally neutral word, right?
Yes.
And everything changed. I spent the next 3, 4 weeks on my bike riding through the streets of Miami with this huge grin on my face, realizing that I'd gotten my life back. And, the sun, everything changed color. I could taste again. Everything changed at the deepest level. And man, I never looked back. I went into my next job interview and I said, "Hey, I look different, but there's nothing I can do that you can do that I can't. I'm 100% functional. Give me a shot." And I started getting jobs, and I literally asked out the next 3,000 women I saw, and I started getting dates. And if they said no to me, it didn't hurt anymore because it wasn't painful. It was interesting. And
Yeah.
so a woman would say no to me, and I would say, "You sure about that? Why?" I had fun with it, and I was no longer an emotional wreck and everything in my life changed. And it was so powerful that I actually kept it a secret. I didn't talk about it. I was married 10 years before I told my wife about that woman in the elevator. I was 50 before I told my brothers about that woman in the elevator. I never talked about it because I honestly thought that, maybe I'm crazy because, being like this is supposed to suck and suddenly it doesn't. Suddenly it's kind of cool. Suddenly it's really interesting. Suddenly I can have a lot of fun with it. And I'm thinking to myself, that can't be good. You know what I mean?
I gotta ask you, how did you recognize that moment? Because those moments can happen time and time again before they're recognized. And so, how did you go from drinking too much, being suicidal, being angry, being upset, being sad, feeling different, feeling disabled, feeling hurt? People would scream at you on the street, like out of fear. You couldn't get jobs, you couldn't get dates, you couldn't get all these things. How did you go from all of that pain, that association to pain, to recognizing that one moment? Like, what do you believe it was that helped you identify that moment?
I'd like to take credit for it, but I can't. I think 2 things happened. I was in so much pain, I can't even describe it. I
I
you
can
know, I
imagine.
was
I can only imagine.
it and the point I'm making is, people avoid pain, they avoid challenge, they avoid difficulty. I mean, our entire Western culture is predicated on this idea that you can avoid adversity. No, you can't. I mean, life is
Yeah.
pain, right? And you
Yeah.
can spend your life you can spend your life avoiding it, or you can, embrace the suck, as they say, and power through. And I'm standing on that elevator and I'm so desperate. I'm so low. I'm so hurt that when that came out of her mouth, I think it was like her throwing a life ring. You know, so low that I just anything was gonna work. But the other half of it was, other than being so desperate that, they say that when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. Well, brother, I was ready, okay? And there she was, and she said 7 words, and I was done. But the other half of it, I've studied this ever since, and it's absolutely fascinating. Here's what's really cool about it. The science hadn't caught up. So as soon as the internet comes out, I'm all over it trying to figure out what the heck happened in that elevator. And the science hadn't caught up. And finally, 5, 6 years ago, well, it might be 9 years ago now, but I think 2016, the science caught up. And from a psychological perspective, it's super, super simple what happened. You have 2 primary neural pathways. One is called threat and avoidance, and all your sensory input comes into these 2 neural pathways where it's parsed and sorted and sent on its way. It's defined. It happens so fast it's unconscious. But you have 2 neural pathways. One is threat and avoidance, and so you fight, flight, or run response. And that's where I lived. I lived in pain. That's a threat. And so I wanted to avoid people and avoid those uncomfortable situations, and I got nothing but pain because I lived in that threat and avoidance mentality for a good bit of my life. But the other neural pathway is promise and approach. And when she said, "I bet you lead an interesting life," I literally flipped. It's like she reached up and turned my channel selector on my forehead. It went from threat and avoidance and pain to promise and approach and interesting and curiosity. So that's what happened. And I tried so hard to find out about the power of language. And the science, as I said, caught up in 2016. And here's what they discovered that we used to believe that language exclusively described your reality. And now we understand that your language can create reality. So if you believe your circumstances are painful, brother, that you just built yourself a prison. But if you change the definition of your circumstances to something more empowering, you can have a completely different experience. It predicts your reality. And so those things, that's what happened in that elevator. I just, you know, if I could find that woman, flat out saved my life. She undoubtedly has no idea what happened. But though I've studied it ever since, and that's what happened on that elevator. She changed my channel from threat and avoidance to promise and approach. I started using more language, which predict a different language, which predicted a more positive future. And I was just so desperate that when she said it, I just was just lucky enough to be there and catch it.
Incredible. I I ask you that because, being a veteran and knowing the statistics of veteran suicide, not everyone gets that moment, or not everyone recognizes that moment,
Boy, you're not kidding.
and being someone who I've actually been down this path. I've been in the position where I have felt suicidal and helpless, and PTSD from childhood and the military was on super high. Like when you're at your lowest points, all those other things, the volume goes up. When you're at a high point, the volume starts to go down a bit. You're able to overpower it with positivity. But when nothing feels really positive around you, it's hard to turn down the volume of the negativity that has followed you your entire life. And it's the same for everyone. The happiest people in the world have been through the toughest times ever. And the saddest people in the world have been through the toughest times ever. So there's equivalency here that life will happen, whether you like it or not. And so, and because we are pack animals, we will interact with other human beings, and those other human beings will do us wrong, treat us badly. Equally as much, there will be some human beings that treat us positively and show us the way.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting in my car, super feeling of just stopping it all and imagining to myself that everyone would be better without me anyway.
Ugh.
Right? That was the thought process, because I had brought, through my business and through my personal dealings and through my things, I had inadvertently brought pain to my household. And if I didn't exist, that pain would go away. And there was a life policy, and there's this, and you start quantifying why this is the answer. And for you, it was a lady on the elevator. For me, it was a guy on a podcast. And I said, I usually I like in the morning, I like to listen to podcasts or videos on YouTube, and I find some business stuff or motivation stuff or like positive stuff. Not the ones that are like, you are a tiger, and like, not that stuff, but the stuff where somebody has a good like 20, 30, 40-minute episode,
Yeah.
and they're bringing like good shit to the table. And I remember turning it on, and I see this guy I'd never heard before, and I click on his video. So let me see. This guy's cool. He's got a beard, black shirt, hat. I'm like, I feel like we'll be cool. Like we could grab a beer together, And I turn it on, and the way that he does his podcast is he puts a hook, then his intro, and then the podcast, right? So he takes the piece of his podcast that is most important, that he believes will be the hook that make people want to stay on the podcast, and he moves it to the front. Then he does his intro, and then he has the full podcast. Podcast was about 20 minutes, but here are the words of the hook. If you are a man contemplating suicide, you're a pussy. And I remember hearing that and going, who does this guy think he is? He don't know what I'm going through. And as you listen to his podcast on this particular subject, he talked about a man who is the head of a household, who is the head of a business, who is, he was describing me.
Yeah.
And then he went on to say, what happens to everybody else, you selfish bastard?
Yeah.
Like, do you think that everybody else is they're not going to be okay. You will forever put a negative shadow on everyone's life by being selfish. And he said, you think your spouse is going to be okay after this? You think your kids are going to be okay after this? What about your employees? Because you no longer exist, your company no longer exists, and they lose their jobs. What, like, why are you being so selfish? And just because that's what it is, you're not really thinking about everyone else. You're only thinking about yourself. I need to stop the pain. And
Yeah,
I
that's
remember,
just
I remember listening to that and going, huh. And I was able to turn my car on and come home.
yeah, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear.
Yeah.
Right?
And that's and it's really interesting, and more people go through this than we would want to admit. And you don't need the arm disability to go through it. You know what I mean? You just Too many people contemplate suicide, too many people. And too many people are sad in their lives, and too many people have a hard time recognizing the good in life.
Yeah, it's an epidemic. The numbers are obscene, and,
Yeah.
whatever I can do to help people figure their way through it, and one of the things that I learned in all my study, and this is important for people to understand, there are 5 areas of your life, some people have 6, but basically 5 areas of your life that matter, and so Mother Nature is chasing me down the street with a hatchet. She doesn't want me to reproduce because I have a disfavored trait.
Yeah.
And so her impact on my life focuses on all 5 areas that matter. So I can't get a job, I can't get a date, I can't have an intimate relationship. Friends don't want to hang out with me because I'm drunk because I'm self-medicating trying to figure out my way through this. I don't have a career or a business future. And I have horrible health. My mental health is shot. I want to kill myself. Those are essentially the 5 areas of life. And if you look at what Mother Nature was doing, because I look different and humans are animals, you're predators, you have the same visual tracking as essentially as other large mammalian predators. You single out people who look different for special treatment, and the special treatment usually isn't good. So the staring is predatory behavior. The refusal to date is based upon reproductive unviability. Who's going to love this, David? You know what I mean? So if you take a look at, I can't get a job, and so my likelihood of surviving and reproducing is greatly diminished. And as a matter of fact, throughout history, the default response to somebody being born like me was to kill it.
Yeah.
So throughout all 5 years, excuse me, 5 areas of your life, throughout all 5 areas of your life, Mother Nature is exerting intense pressure to make me fail. Okay, she's chasing me down the street with a hatchet. And everybody's the same. I'm not special. It's just that I studied what was happening to me. And then so to overcome that, Mother Nature comes to the rescue and gives this amazing capacity to redefine your circumstances. And I redefined them from painful to interesting. And suddenly, I grew a spine. And instead of defining everything as painful and going into, cascading behaviors that resulted from such a disempowering mental state and predictably bad results, I changed my windshield to, gosh, this is interesting. So I'm in the Dallas airport one time, 2 o'clock in the morning. My flight was canceled. I don't know if you've been to Dallas, but to access the train platform, you've got to go up one long escalator. And I'm going up the
Yeah.
escalator, and the guy's coming down the escalator the other way. And nobody says a word. It's 2 in the morning. We're both exhausted. And he looks at me and he does this. He goes, that disgust face.
Yeah.
And, a lot of people would be outraged by that and say something. I just kind of laughed at the guy and I wrote a note about it to study what that is. And so I studied it, and it is the disgust reflex. Okay. People with a compromised body envelope trigger the disgust reflex, which is Mother Nature's way of saying, get the hell out of the gene pool, right? She doesn't want me
Yeah.
reproducing. So humans are innately wired to make sure that people who look different, like I do, are eliminated from the gene pool. And it's a comprehensive a comprehensive scheme to make sure that happens. And so once I became aware of that and started studying it, when people react certain ways, when I go to drive-through windows, dude, I should put a camera on it. People scream, people throw my change into the passenger seat, they freak out.
Yeah.
And it never stops, it never goes away. But now I have the capacity to handle it and understand it and sometimes welcome it because it's absolutely fascinating. Everybody's got to make it through this life one way or another. It's actually I'm going to say this, people are going to think I'm crazy, dude. It's interesting. It's fun. It's interesting as hell to walk this path and be aware of it because you learn so much.
If you become a study of human response, it makes it easier to swallow the response, right?
Yeah, if you understand why it's happening, you don't take it personally anymore. You look at these people and you understand, hey, I get it. I look different, dude. You're having a tough time with that. If you can't get over it, we're probably not going to hang out together. But if you can get over it, there's potential here.
Yeah.
It's not my problem. It's their problem. It no longer was my failure. It's just their ignorance or whatever they're dealing with. They don't want to have a relationship with me because I'm missing pinkies or whatever. And that's okay. I understand it now.
I think that it's also it's also important to identify that it's not all human response because there are plenty of people that don't look at you twice.
Yeah,
And I know that.
you're absolutely right about that, David. You're
Yeah,
absolutely right. See, that's it. I used to believe it was a biological construct, but it's not.
right. That it was
It's a
everyone.
social construct.
Right.
It's man-made on some level. If it was a biological construct, the response would be universal. It's not. I've got many, many friends like you, for example. You shook my hand the day I met you, looked me in the eye, gave me a good firm handshake, and we were off to the races, man.
Yeah.
Because but I also studied that, and the marker for it is higher intelligence. People with a higher intelligence use a different part of their brain when assessing compromised body envelopes, like the one I'm wearing. And people with lower intelligence run their response to differentiated looking people through their amygdala, the fear zone. And so, generally speaking, the marker of people who are going to be comfortable with me uh, is a higher intelligence, a higher intellect. And so I just complimented you. You should say thank you, David. You should say thanks for calling me smart, man.
Yeah, I appreciate you. I'm a higher intelligence. I just want everybody to know that Kip said I'm a higher intelligence.
You're a damn genius, and I love your beard, man.
By the way, I didn't even feel the need to thank you for that because I just think about this for a moment. I felt that should be normal human response.
We're getting there. Well,
Yeah,
we're getting there. But the interesting thing about disability is the incidence, the frequency of it is declining in the population. And it's declining in the population because with amniocentesis and other, methods of determining the health of a fetus, more and more people are aborting uh, babies they don't want.
right,
So over time, the incidence of it is dropping somewhat, particularly across specific disabilities like Down syndrome.
right,
Um, and in the Low Countries, Finland, Norway, and Sweden, I believe they have fairly robust euthanasia programs. So when somebody's born disabled, they're terminating if the parents agree. And I'm not saying any of this is good. Okay.
yeah,
I'm not advocating for this,
right.
but I am saying
Right, but what are we doing? We're looking at those folks are also associating the pain, not only pain for the child, but the pain that they will have to go through raising said child.
no
And
question about it. You're
yeah,
absolutely correct. There's a full tenured professor at Princeton. This is an Ivy League school, a full tenured professor. I believe his name is Singer, who advocates for terminating persons with disabilities at birth and across a myriad of cases. And it's frightening, it really is. But that's Mother Nature saying that human beings are animals, and those animals are going to assess reproductive viability continuously and eliminate those from the gene pool that they don't want to see more of. And I'm very grateful that I was born in America because across Central Asia, rural China, East Africa, they now terminate disabled babies at birth. That's the standard operating procedure. I'm not going to comment on how common it is, but it's common enough that we know about it.
yeah,
But I was born in a place where my father The original advice when I was born was cut his arms off, give him a set of wooden arms with hooks, and put him in an institution. That was the standard operating procedure
Yeah.
for persons with physical disabilities when I was born and where I was born. Put him in an institution. And my dad said, "No way, man." He threw me in the car and he took me to the Mayo Clinic. We found a surgeon who did this, which is
Yeah.
nothing but a miracle. So
Yeah.
it's just been a wild ride, and to have the ability and the opportunity to study why it has unfolded as it has unfolded, has just been a tremendous blessing in my life.
So transitioning this, because we associate disability quickly with physical, but there are emotional and mental disabilities, right? So let's
Yes.
not remove Down syndrome from it. That's also physical, right? You can see that. But there
Yes.
are disabilities that you can't see. And I think that there are many people out there who are having trouble getting to their teacher, the student who hasn't met the teacher yet, right?
Yes.
There are
Yes.
many people out there who are carrying these hidden, what they believe to be hidden disabilities, because they're internal, they're not external. They look perfectly normal, right? All functional, but inside there's something wrong. And I don't think they realize that that energy is felt. You may not be able to see it, but the energy is felt. So
Yes.
those people who have to work on those things, they also run into the same situations that you were running into. They can't date appropriately. They're having trouble keeping a job or being at a job. They don't have good friends or good people because their friends are like, dude, I just can't hang out with this guy. Like his energy's too heavy, right? And there's too much going on there. And those folks need to wake up and also realize that this is something that they need to pay attention to. I believe, again, like I mentioned to you, I have no physical disarmaments. I have arthritis. I have things that hurt. I have bad knee. I have bad back. Like, I spent 9 years in the Marine Corps carrying packs and kicking indoors. Like, you know what I mean? Like it was bound to happen. And I try to stay in shape the best I can. I think I'm in pretty great damn shape for 48 years old, almost 48. And to be able to have that ability to do that and try to put muscle around my joints so that my joints don't pick up all the weight by themselves, and
Yeah.
things of the nature, and it gives me confidence. It gives me the ability and the desire to want to be around people and help more people and help more people achieve.
Yeah. You know, the greatest stigma, some people believe there's a hierarchy of disability, and the closer to your brain, the greater the stigma. So a
Right.
person with an amputated foot has a different place on the hierarchy than a person with an amputated arm.
Right.
And that is primarily, I believe, based upon how visual and how obvious the disability is. But for many people who have cognitive or mental difficulties, it's invisible to a certain extent, but it's still Mother Nature pounding on the door. Because if for whatever reason people are picking up on that energy or certain behaviors that make somebody an oddity or different, if you will, and that gets noticed, well, the same mechanisms kick into play that impacted my life. You're shunned, you're ignored, you're going to face challenges. But the key to that is get help, get help, and then get help again. Because when you get help, there's a range of treatments that have been proven incredibly effective to help people get back to where they need to be content and find fulfilling lives. And they need to get help. You can't ignore it, because if you ignore it, that can start a really, really dangerous spiral. But in my case, that woman told me to redefine my circumstances as interesting, and it just completely shifted me from, "Oh my god, my life sucks," to, "Holy smokes, this is a gas and it's really interesting. I want to study this and know more about it." And so I walked that path, and you can find your way, but the start is you get help.
Yeah. I think, and not only get help, but if the help that you get is not helping, move on to the next person and the next
There you go.
person. So you're the student who finds their teacher,
Yeah.
because the truth is that no matter how highly accredited somebody might be, they just might not fit your profile, and that's
Yeah, if you
okay.
don't connect, if you're not seeing improvement, get help again, and then do it again until it works, because there is a
Yeah.
way out. Often there is a way out, and it's just going to take some it's going to take some effort. And I know how
Yeah.
hard it is. I know how difficult it is, but I just got lucky on that elevator, David. Everything changed in 15, 20 seconds. And it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. I just am unbelievably blessed that that
Yeah.
happened.
Yeah. That's pretty amazing, man. I'm blessed to know you. I'm excited to have this conversation. A bit of this conversation was a little bit emotional, and I'm not your typical emotional guy in public. So I appreciate that. And I think there's so much to be said about what you've been through and how you've been able to surpass it and be as successful as you are, that people need to pay attention and figure out how to associate it to themselves. And that's why I wanted to bring up the mental side of it, the mindset piece of it, because you don't have to have disabled arms or a missing foot to associate with what Kip is bringing to the table. You just need to be able to understand and associate it to whatever it is that you're going through in your life, and take this advice and take this clearing. Don't sit around and wait. Like Kip and I were lucky enough to have a teacher. Like somebody said a few words and a spark went off. You might not be so lucky. So you might actually go have to hunt down your teacher. And by the way, that effort is everything, because I
It
didn't
is.
have that effort. You didn't have that effort. We got lucky.
Yeah. And
We got,
well, we kind of did, David, because neither of us gave up.
yeah,
I wasn't sitting at home playing the victim. I was out working, right?
yeah,
And you
yeah,
were doing the same thing, okay?
yep,
And we just kept hustling, man. And the reward comes to people who continue to put forth effort to achieve whatever they're hoping to achieve in this life, and persevere despite the difficulty. I wouldn't have been in that elevator if I had said, "Hey, I'm not going to be a bike messenger. That's not good enough for me." I jumped at that job,
yeah,
and it was a great job, and it saved my life. But you just got to keep pounding through and find your teacher, find your help. And I guess the takeaway from my perspective is, you get what you expect in this life, man. Times are tough, but if you define your circumstances as difficult, overwhelming, painful, that's what you're going to get. You can build yourself a prison just like I did. And you just
yeah,
need to be very, very careful about the language you use to describe your circumstances. You need to define them in a manner that empowers you
yeah,
always. And that's why I have a
yeah.
morning routine. I get up and I weed my garden. I do my gratitudes. I journal about a win from the day before, and I set my mind to look for things to be grateful for, and watch my language, because your self-talk literally defines the quality of your life.
That's huge, man. I got on this mission post that event where I said, if the only way that you fail is if you quit.
Yeah.
And that triggered something else. It triggered the common usage of the word, or of the words, fail forward. And I started to kind of study a little bit of what we're talking about now, which is language is everything.
Yeah.
And so, I think there's a hypocrisy out there of people saying, high level people using the words, you must fail forward, instead of saying you must succeed forward. And yes, you will have some hiccups along the way, but the only way those hiccups become a failure is if you quit. And so we're constantly, this poor generation that's a couple sets below us is thinking, I'm just going to do this and I'm not going to get any education behind it, because when I fail, I'll learn something, rather than becoming the mentee, the apprentice, if you will, and learning something at full value, so that the leverage of failure is significantly less. And also, when you have a mentee, or you have a coach, or you have an apprentice, or a master, if you will, right? Like if if you want to learn kung fu from the monks, like, you're nothing and they're the master. You know what I mean? And oftentimes that will last 20 years before 30 years before you could even take a master position,
Yep.
And, here we are in a world where people just go do, and then they fail because they were told that's okay. And it's not okay. It's not okay. It's not okay to fail. It's not okay to quit. See, that's where you have to hear the difference in the language, And so I went on this mission, and I've been working my butt off to spread this word. Stop using the words fail forward. Stop glorifying people that say you got to fail 5 times before you win 6. Like, yes, you got people like Alex Hormozy who gets up and he says, look, dude, I opened up 17 business that's completely crashed. And it wasn't until my 18th business that I found success. Yes, but did he fail 17 times or did he learn a lesson 17 times? Did he have 17 hiccups? Because he never quit. Because had he quit, had he failed, he would have never got to the next spot. So if you take that language and that theory in place, it's literally impossible to fail forward.
Yeah.
You can't quit and move forward. So we have to change that language, and we have to let people know that you're in this to win it.
Yeah.
And there's so many ways you could YouTube, you could Google, you could hire a coach, you could, have a mentor, you could join a company and tell somebody, hey, dude, listen, I want to learn this business and I will freaking take your laundry to the laundromat every week if you want me to, and buy your coffee every morning on the way in if you are willing to teach me this industry. Like, we've forgotten that.
Yes, we have. And I tell you what, this is another way that I got lucky. David, it took me 6 years to learn how to button my shirt. It took me, 5 years to learn how to tie my shoes. I was like 11 before I could cut my own steak. Learning how to use these things, they sold them all, and that's all well and good. But at the end of the day, they're useless, puffy, swollen, ugly lumps of flesh. I had to turn them into workable hands.
Yeah.
So, the beauty of that was I learned perseverance. I learned diligence. I learned how not to quit, because one of the top 5 universal global human fears is loss of autonomy. And I'm sitting there watching my brothers throw their jackets on and run outside and have a snowball fight. And I can't zip my jacket. And I realized, at a very young age, I had to get to work. I had to get to work, and I need to work until I achieve independence, or I'm going to have a big problem. So I got to work, and I didn't quit. And I achieved full, complete independence, physical independence, by the time I was about 15 years old. And the few things I've run into since then that have been physically challenging, I've mastered them based upon the lessons I learned as a kid. Just keep going, you'll figure it out. Never quit. It's amazing that Mother Nature might be chasing me down the street with a hatchet sometimes, but at the same time, when she's doing that, you find the tools necessary to dodge the blade again. And that makes your life damn interesting, man.
Yeah. Yep, it sure does. And so I don't know if you know this or not, but I published this about last year. And it's called The Truth About Failure. And I talk about that theory in here at a high level. And I bring a lot of my personal experiences to the table. And honestly, in my opinion, the best thing I've ever put on paper.
You sent me a free copy of your last book, David, and I haven't gotten a free copy of that one. I'm not very happy.
Damn, Kip. All right. You send me your address, I'll get you a copy. By the way, those of you listening, it's available on Amazon, okay?
Awesome. I get a copy of that, David.
Kip, man, thank you for doing the show with me. I think this show is fantastic. Not that I think, I know this show is fantastic, and I know that people are going to take away a lot of good from this, and they're going to really step up to the plate and enjoy this conversation that we're having, because it really it needs to be spoken about. It needs to be public. It needs to be front and center. And I'm glad that we had this conversation, Kip.
David, it's my pleasure, man. It's so good to hook up with you again. So good to see that beautiful beard, that beautiful face.
Thanks, sir.
Yeah, man, it's just good to catch up with you again, David. You're a really good man. It was a pleasure meeting you years ago and staying in touch. And thank you so much for the opportunity, man. Thank you.
Thank you, Kip, man. I appreciate you, sir.
You have a great day, sir.
All right, you too. Those of you that are listening right now and really tuned in, man, I am so glad that you made it to the end of this episode, because I know that we have potentially changed your life if you listen this far along. And so what I need you to do is subscribe, like, comment, and share. Get this message out there so that more and more people can be impacted by the conversations we bring to the Freedom Achiever podcast. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We'll see you next time.